The colony world of Arden was young compared to Earth. Its skies were pale blue, its forests still wild, and its soil rich for farming. Families had come here with dreams of building a new beginning. They built homes along the valley, set up wind towers, and cleared fields for crops. Life was not easy, but it was honest, and every sunrise felt like a promise of something greater. Laren, a mechanic, spent his days repairing machines that kept the colony alive. Engines for the irrigation pumps, solar panels for the grid, and the transports that carried supplies between settlements all passed through his hands. He liked his work, because it gave him purpose, and in a place so far from Earth, purpose was the one thing people needed most. Myra, a teacher, kept the small school alive. Children gathered under her guidance, learning not only numbers and words but also the stories of old Earth. She reminded them that humanity had survived wars, storms, and endless hardships before. On this new world, they were the start of something even larger. Tobin, a farmer, spent long hours under the sun, tilling the soil and tending the crops. He believed food was the heart of survival. Without bread, there would be no community, and without community, there would be no hope. His hands were rough and scarred, but his voice was kind, and he often shared food with neighbors when times were hard. Together, these settlers and many others had carved out a fragile life on Arden. They lived with caution, knowing storms could sweep through the valleys, knowing their supplies from Earth were limited, and knowing they were far from the protection of the central fleets. Still, the people trusted that distance meant safety. Who would trouble a small colony hidden on the edge of the stars? Then came the hum. It began as a faint sound, so low it could have been mistaken for the wind moving across the mountains. The settlers noticed it during the late afternoon, when the sun was falling and the air grew still. At first, no one gave it much thought. Children pointed at the sky, laughing, saying it sounded like a giant drum. But as the hours passed, the hum grew stronger. It rolled through the air like a deep vibration, steady and unnatural. By nightfall, the settlers gathered outside their homes. They looked up and saw faint lights moving high above the clouds. At first they thought it might be a fleet from Earth, perhaps a resupply mission arriving without warning. But the lights were not in formation. They shifted and shimmered, moving with a strange rhythm that no human ship had ever shown. Laren climbed onto the roof of his workshop to see better. He narrowed his eyes at the sky, his heart quickening. "Those are not ours," he whispered. He could not explain how he knew, but every instinct told him the truth. Word spread quickly. Families left their homes and moved toward the central square, searching for answers. Myra stood among them, trying to calm the children, though she too felt the weight of fear pressing down. Tobin joined the crowd, his hands still dirty from the fields, his eyes fixed on the sky. The hum grew louder until the ground itself seemed to tremble. The settlers watched as one of the lights descended lower, cutting through the clouds. A vast shape emerged, dark and metallic, its surface glowing with strange lines of energy. It was no human design. Its angles were sharp, its movements smooth and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. The crowd gasped, some falling silent, others whispering in panic. The colony had no defenses, no warships, no soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, mechanics, and children. The sight of the massive vessel filled them with the sudden knowledge that they were not alone, and that whoever had found them had come with power far beyond their own. Myra placed her hand on the shoulder of a young boy beside her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Stay close," she said softly. But inside, she wondered if there was anywhere left to stay safe. Laren climbed down from the roof and joined the others. His face was set in grim silence. "This is not a supply ship. This is something else. Something we have never faced before." The settlers stood in the square long into the night, watching the alien lights circle above their valley. No message came. No voice spoke. Only the steady hum filled the air, a reminder that the peace they had known was fragile, and that their lives had changed forever. And as dawn broke, Arden no longer felt like a place of promise. It felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. The morning after the strange arrival, the people of Arden woke to a sky that no longer felt like their own. The hum had not faded. It pulsed softly, steady and low, as if the very air carried the breath of some hidden giant. The settlers went about their morning routines, but each task was touched with unease. Farmers checked their crops with hurried glances upward. Children who once ran through the fields now stayed close to their homes. Even the birds of Arden, usually filling the air with song, had gone silent. Laren tried to bury himself in work. He spent the early hours fixing a broken pump near the eastern well, but his hands were slower than usual. His ears kept turning toward the sky. The sound was not like an engine, not like any machine he had known. It was alive in a way that unsettled him. Tobin walked past on his way to the fields. He stopped when he saw Laren crouched by the pump. "Did you hear it change?" he asked. Laren straightened, wiping grease from his hands. "Yes. Last night it was steady. This morning it rises and falls. Like it is searching for something." Tobin frowned. He held his tools close to his chest. "If it is searching, then it will find us." By midday, the settlers gathered again in the central square. Myra stood before them, her voice calm though her heart pounded in her chest. "We must not give in to fear," she said. "We are far from Earth, yes, but that does not mean we are abandoned. Perhaps what we see is only exploration. Perhaps they are not hostile." Her words gave some comfort, but only for a moment. For in that same hour, the sky split open with fire. A flash burst across the northern horizon. The settlers turned as one to watch, their eyes wide with shock. A second later, a deep roar reached their ears. The nearest outpost, a small cluster of farms and a water tower, was gone. Where it once stood now rose a column of smoke. The ground shook beneath their feet as the echoes rolled across the valley. Screams filled the square. Mothers clutched their children. Men and women ran toward the edges of the settlement, desperate to see if friends or family had been lost. Laren's jaw tightened as he watched the black cloud climb into the sky. "That was no accident," he said. His voice was flat, heavy with the weight of truth. Another light streaked downward, striking the hills to the west. A brilliant explosion followed, throwing dust and rock into the air. The settlers covered their ears as the sound tore through them. The alien vessels had made their message clear. This was not a visit of peace. Panic spread quickly. Some shouted for the transports, urging that they must flee into the mountains. Others argued that escape was useless, for the ships above could see all. Myra forced her way through the crowd, her hands raised to steady them. "Listen to me," she cried. "Running blindly will only scatter us. We must stay together. We must think before we act." Tobin arrived from the fields, his face streaked with dust. "The ground shook there as well," he said. "Animals fled before the blast reached us. They knew what was coming." He looked at Myra, then at Laren. "What are we going to do?" Laren looked to the sky. The alien vessel hovered high above, glowing faintly as if it were watching. His voice was quiet but steady. "We are going to survive. But first we must understand them. If they wanted us gone in an instant, they could have destroyed everything at once. Instead, they strike in pieces. That means something." The settlers listened, their fear turning slowly into grim silence. Laren was right. If destruction was the only goal, there would be no colony left to defend. The aliens were testing them, pushing them, perhaps measuring their reaction. That thought brought little comfort, yet it gave them a thread of hope. As night fell, Arden no longer felt like the same world. Fires burned on the horizon. Ash drifted into the valley. The settlers gathered in their homes, whispering of what to do. Some prayed, others wept, and a few began to sharpen tools into weapons. In the schoolhouse, Myra gathered the children close. She told them stories of old Earth, of how humans had faced storms, wars, and endless trials. "We come from survivors," she said softly. "And we will remain survivors." The children clung to her words like a lantern in the dark. Laren returned to his workshop, his mind racing. He laid out every tool he owned, every scrap of metal and wire. If machines had brought this fear upon them, then machines might also give them a chance to fight back. His hands moved quickly now, no longer slow or hesitant. Survival required action. Tobin stood on the edge of his fields, staring at the smoke on the horizon. His crops were still standing, but he knew the land itself could be burned away in an instant. He tightened his grip on the soil and whispered, "They will not take this from us." The settlers of Arden did not sleep easily that night. Above them, the alien ships moved silently, lights shifting like watchful eyes. Below, the colony held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The calm of their world had been broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the attacks were heavy with fear. Smoke still rose on the horizon where the outposts had once stood. The settlers of Arden gathered often in the central square, whispering about what they had seen. No message had come from the skies, no voice from the alien vessels. Only silence and the steady hum remained, as if the machines above were waiting for the right moment to strike again. Laren spent long hours in his workshop, his hands moving across tools and broken parts. He could not sit still, not when the colony was in danger. The settlers had no warships, no trained soldiers, but they did have machines. Mining rigs, drilling equipment, atmospheric flyers, tools meant for work, not battle. Yet Laren believed that with enough creativity, even such machines could be turned into something useful. Myra visited him often. She stood in the doorway of the workshop one evening, her face lit by the glow of the small lamps inside. "You cannot fight them with scrap," she said, her voice soft but firm. Laren wiped his brow and looked at her. "Maybe not. But we cannot stand with nothing in our hands. If we do not try, then we wait only for fire to fall from the sky again." Myra hesitated, then nodded. She knew he was right. Fear was already eating at the settlers. If no one acted, panic would tear the colony apart before the aliens even struck again. Tobin, too, felt the pull of action. His fields stretched wide across the valley, and he feared they would soon be burned like the northern outpost. One morning he walked into Laren's workshop, carrying a heavy metal rod. "If you are making weapons, then let me help," he said. "I know soil and stone, not machines, but I know strength. My hands will not be idle." Laren studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Good. Then we start together." Word spread quickly. A small group of settlers began gathering in secret. They worked in the barns, in the empty schoolhouse after lessons, and in Laren's workshop. They stripped mining rigs of their drills, reforged plows into blades, and reinforced transport hulls with sheets of scrap metal. None of it looked like proper weaponry, but it gave them a sense of purpose. Myra took on the role of voice and guide. She spoke to the others not about victory, but about survival. "We do not need to destroy them," she told the crowd one evening. "We need only to endure. If we hold out long enough, word may reach Earth, and help may come. Until then, we must believe in ourselves." The settlers clung to her words. For the first time since the attacks, they felt a spark of courage. Their chance to test that courage came sooner than they expected. On the fourth night after the first strikes, the hum grew louder. Shadows fell across the valley as one of the alien vessels descended lower than before. From its underside, several smaller shapes dropped into the air. They were not as large as the main ship, but they moved with precision, glowing faintly as they glided toward the colony. Laren saw them first from the edge of the square. "Drones," he said sharply. He had studied the fragments of wreckage that had fallen from the earlier blasts, and he recognized the design. They were machines sent to test, to scout, perhaps to destroy. The settlers did not scatter. Instead, they gathered their makeshift weapons. Tobin heft the heavy rod he had carried before, now sharpened at one end. Myra moved among the children, guiding them into the schoolhouse for safety, her voice calm though her heart raced. The drones reached the valley floor and began to glide across the settlement. Their lights swept over buildings and fields, scanning everything in sight. Then, without warning, one fired a burst of energy at a storage shed, reducing it to flames. Laren shouted. Now from behind a row of transport wagons, several settlers pushed forward a mining rig they had armed with metal spikes. The machine rolled into the path of the nearest drone. With a roar of engines, it drove forward and rammed the drone into the ground. Sparks flew as the machine collapsed in a burst of light. The settlers cheered, their fear breaking for the first time into hope. But the fight was not easy. Two other drones fired at the transports, tearing holes through the metal. Settlers scattered for cover, some striking back with improvised crossbows and spears. The drones were fast, moving like shadows, but they were not untouchable. Each time they came close, the settlers swarmed, striking with tools and blades until the machines faltered. Tobin faced one alone at the edge of the fields. The drone fired at him, burning the soil beside his feet, but he did not retreat. With a shout, he drove his sharpened rod upward, piercing through the glowing lines of the machine. The drone whirred, shook violently, and then fell silent at his feet. When the last drone fell, the valley grew quiet again. Smoke rose from the burned shed, but the colony still stood. The settlers gathered in the square, breathing hard, their eyes wide with both exhaustion and triumph. Myra stepped forward, her voice steady. "Do you see what we have done? We stood, and we did not fall. We are not helpless. We are human, and we endure." The settlers raised their makeshift weapons high, their voices rising with hers. For the first time since the ships had appeared, they felt more than fear. They felt strength. Above them, the alien vessel hovered silently, its lights shifting. It had sent its machines to test the humans, but now it knew the truth. The settlers of Arden would not bow. They had made their first stand, and it was only the beginning. The night after the battle was restless. The settlers of Arden did not sleep well, yet for the first time since the alien ships had appeared, they carried a spark of pride in their hearts. They had faced the drones and survived. They had not been swept aside like dust. Still, fear lingered. The vessels still circled above, silent and waiting. Laren sat alone in his workshop, the wreckage of a drone laid out across a table. He had ordered the settlers to bring every piece they could recover from the battle. Now twisted metal, scorched panels, and glowing fragments covered his workspace. His eyes moved carefully over each part, his hands turning pieces over, searching for something hidden within the design. Myra entered quietly, carrying a lamp. She set it beside him. "You should rest," she said. Laren shook his head. "If we rest, we may not wake to another day. We need to know how these machines work. We need to know how to break them." Myra looked at the broken drone, its surface marked with strange lines of energy that still pulsed faintly. "And do you think you can?" Laren gave a tired smile. "I have to try." By morning, Tobin arrived with two other settlers. They carried more fragments from the battlefield. Together they helped Laren sort and examine the parts. Hours passed as they tested wires, hammered metal plates, and studied the strange circuits that glowed with a pale light. The technology was far beyond anything they knew, but even the most advanced machine still had limits. It was Myra who noticed it first. She stood beside the table, pointing at a small gap in the armor. "Look here," she said. "This part is thin. It does not carry the same strength as the rest." Laren leaned closer. He tapped the fragile section with a tool and frowned. "You are right. This is not built for close contact. It is built to move fast, to strike from a distance. That is why when we forced them near, they fell apart." The settlers exchanged glances. Tobin's face hardened with determination. "Then we know how to fight them. We do not run. We pull them close, and we strike where they are weak." The discovery spread quickly through the colony. It became a whisper of hope in every home and field. The settlers began to prepare traps, nets of heavy chains, trenches dug into the ground, and hidden charges placed in the canyons nearby. If the drones came again, they would not face only frightened settlers with simple tools. They would face a colony ready to fight with cunning. Myra gathered the children in the schoolhouse once more. She told them stories not of fear, but of cleverness. She spoke of how humans had long survived by thinking in ways their enemies did not expect. "Strength is not only in size or power," she told them. "It is in the mind. That is what keeps us alive." The children listened closely, their eyes bright with something new belief. That evening, the settlers tested their first trap. Using a broken mining rig as bait, they lured a lone drone that had descended into the valley. It glided forward, its light sweeping across the machine. Then, as it drew close, the settlers triggered a chain mechanism hidden in the rocks above. Heavy metal nets dropped, entangling the drone and dragging it to the ground. The machine fought to rise, lights flaring, but Tobin and two others rushed forward with sharpened rods. They struck again and again at the weak points until the drone lay silent. Cheers rose across the valley. It was not just survival now, it was victory. Laren studied the wreckage once more, confirming what they had seen. "They fear closeness," he said. "They fight like hunters from a distance, but they do not know how to stand against hands that will not let go." That night, fires burned bright in the square as settlers shared food and stories. For the first time in many days, laughter returned to Arden. It was not the laughter of safety, but of courage. They knew the aliens were powerful, but they also knew power was not without weakness. Above them, the vessel still hovered. Perhaps the beings inside were watching. Perhaps they were measuring. If so, then they now saw a people who would not break. Myra stood before the crowd, her voice rising above the crackle of the fire. "We are not the oldest race in the stars. We are not the strongest. But we are the ones who endure. Every step, every breath, every fight is proof that we will not vanish. Let the sky look down on us and see not fear, but will." The settlers raised their hands, their faces lit by firelight. In that moment, the colony of Arden felt united like never before. Laren looked once more at the silent sky. He knew the battles ahead would be harder. The aliens would not stop with drones. Yet deep inside, he felt something he had not felt since the day the ships arrived: faith. They had found a hidden weakness. And with it, they had found the first real chance of survival. The Valley of Arden no longer carried the same silence it once had. Every field, every road, and every canyon now held hidden traps. Nets woven from chains, tunnels carved beneath the soil, and charges prepared with mining powder, all carefully placed to meet the next attack. The settlers were not soldiers, yet they moved with the focus of people who knew their lives depended on every detail. Laren worked day and night, guiding teams as they strengthened their defenses. His hands were always black with grease, his eyes heavy with little sleep, but his mind remained sharp. He had learned much from the broken drones. Every weak point he studied became a weapon for the colony. Myra gave her strength to the people in another way. Each evening, she gathered the settlers and spoke with calm words that steadied their hearts. She reminded them that they were not just surviving, but fighting for a future. Her voice was like a flame that kept the cold fear from returning. Tobin led the farmers in digging the trenches and setting the traps. His strong hands carried more weight than most, and his determination inspired others. He reminded them that the land they tilled was worth protecting, and that no fire from the sky would take it without resistance. Days passed, and the alien vessels remained above, watching but not striking. The settlers grew restless. They knew another wave would come, and they waited for it with both dread and determination. Then, one dawn, the sky broke again. From the hovering ships, a squadron of drones descended into the valley. This time they came in greater number, moving in a wide line as though searching for every sign of resistance. Their lights scanned the ground, and their hum filled the air like the growl of approaching storms. Laren stood at the center of the square, tools strapped to his belt. Around him, settlers clutched their improvised weapons, their faces pale but firm. He raised his hand, signaling them to hold steady. The plan had been set, and all they needed was the right moment. The first drone glided near the canyon mines, its light sweeping over the rocks. At once, settlers hidden above triggered the charges they had planted. A roar thundered as the walls collapsed, burying the machine beneath tons of stone. Cheers broke out, but only for a second. The other drones turned sharply, their lights flashing as they fired bursts of energy into the cliffs. Rock shattered, and two settlers barely escaped the blasts. "Stay together," Myra shouted, her voice carrying across the square. "Do not break the line." The next wave of drones moved into the valley itself. As they passed over the fields, settlers hidden in the trenches leapt up with nets of chain. They threw the heavy nets high, wrapping around the glowing bodies of the machines. The drones fought to rise, but the weight dragged them down. Tobin charged forward with his sharpened rod, striking at the weak joints until sparks flew and the machines fell silent. One by one, the settlers used their traps. Drones were lured into narrow passages where they could not move freely. Some were blinded with mirrors that reflected sunlight into their sensors. Others were drawn toward empty transports rigged to explode with mining powder. Every victory came with risk, but each success built the courage of the people. Laren himself faced a drone near his workshop. The machine fired at him, the blast tearing through the wall and setting it aflame. He rolled to the side, clutching a heavy tool in his hand. As the drone swept low to finish him, he leapt forward, slamming the tool into the fragile section of its armor. The drone shook violently, lights flickering, then collapsed to the ground. Laren staggered back, his chest heaving, but his eyes burned with resolve. When the last of the drones fell, the valley erupted with cheers. Settlers rushed into the square, raising their weapons and shouting in triumph. Smoke rose from the wreckage, but the colony still stood. This was not just survival. It was victory. Myra climbed onto a wagon, her face lit by the morning sun. She lifted her hand, and the crowd fell silent. "Do you see what we have done?" she called. "They came to break us, but it is they who fell. We are not prey. We are the storm that will not end. Every strike they make against us will only make us stronger." The settlers roared in answer, their voices echoing through the valley. For the first time, their fear had turned into fire. They no longer saw themselves as victims, but as fighters. High above, the alien vessel drifted back, its lights dimming as though in retreat. Perhaps it had not expected such resistance. Perhaps it had learned that these humans were not as fragile as they appeared. Laren watched the sky with narrowed eyes. "They will return," he said quietly. "And next time, they will not hold back." Tobin stood beside him, gripping his weapon tightly. "Then neither will we." The settlers of Arden had made their turning strike. They had faced the machines of the sky and stood victorious. The war was far from over, but the first true battle had been theirs. The smoke from the fallen drones still drifted across the valley, but the settlers of Arden no longer bowed their heads. They had fought, and they had won. Their victory was small compared to the power of the ships above, yet it lit a fire in their hearts that no darkness could put out. Laren stood in the workshop, repairing what tools and weapons had been damaged in the fight. His body ached, his hands were raw, but his mind was alive. He kept thinking of how the drones had fallen when forced close, how the settlers had turned simple tools into weapons. Each strike had proven a truth he could no longer ignore. Humans could resist. Myra gathered the people in the Central Valley that evening. The fires of celebration burned bright, but she knew their battle was far from over. She climbed onto a platform of stone, her figure lit by torchlight. The crowd fell silent as her voice carried across the night. "We are still here," she said firmly. "The sky thought to erase us, but we stand. The ground we walk is scarred, our homes are broken, but our spirit is unbroken. Do you see it? We are more than survivors. We are the ones who fight back." A cheer rose from the settlers, their voices echoing into the hills. Children clapped their hands, farmers raised their tools like banners, and for a moment, the valley felt unshakable. But Myra was not done. She turned her gaze toward the faint glow of the alien vessel above. "Let them hear us," she said. "Let them know that we will not vanish. We are not prey. We are human, and we endure." The settlers answered her with a roar. It was not just sound, it was a cry that reached every corner of the valley. It was the cry of survival. Laren, moved by the moment, stepped forward. His voice was steady, though softer than Myra's. "We do not know when help will come from Earth. Perhaps it is far away. But we have sent our signals into the void. Our words carry across the stars. If other colonies hear us, they too will rise. We are not alone. This is not only our fight, it is the fight of all humanity." His words spread hope like sparks. The settlers understood now that their struggle was bigger than their valley, bigger than Arden itself. They were standing at the edge of something vast. That night, the settlers worked together to strengthen their communication tower. Wires were repaired, signals were boosted, and every ounce of power was directed to the beacon. Myra and Laren drafted a message, short and clear. "To all who hear, this is Arden. We have faced the sky. They strike from the dark, but they are not invincible. We have found their weakness. We stand with us." The message was sent again and again, carried into the blackness between the stars. The settlers did not know if anyone would hear it, but they believed. That belief alone gave them strength. Tavin, watching the beacon glow against the night, placed his hand on the shoulder of a young boy standing beside him. "Remember this moment," he said quietly. "The day we found our voice. The day we told the stars that we will not fall." In the following days, the settlers lived with both fear and determination. They rebuilt what had been burned, they sharpened their tools, and they prepared for whatever came next. Each task, no matter how small, felt like part of a larger purpose. The alien vessel remained above, unmoving, as if watching. Perhaps it waited for orders, or perhaps it studied the humans below, measuring them. But the settlers no longer trembled under its shadow. They looked up at it with narrowed eyes and clenched fists. Myra noticed the change in the children most of all. Where once they had hidden behind their parents, now they walked with heads held high. They spoke of the battle with pride, telling how their fathers and mothers had pulled down the machines. They no longer dreamed only of fear. They dreamed of fighting back. On the seventh night after their victory, the settlers gathered again in the valley. This time, it was Tavin who spoke. His voice was rough but filled with power. "We are not the strongest," he said. "We are not the oldest. But when they strike, we rise. When they burn, we rebuild. And when they try to fill us with fear, we give them resistance. That is who we are." The settlers lifted their voices once more. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder. It was no longer a frightened colony speaking. It was a people declaring their place in the stars. High above, the alien vessel shifted slightly, its lights flickering. To the settlers, it almost seemed as if the sky itself had paused to listen. Laren looked upward, his jaw set. They thought fear would silence us, he said quietly. But instead, it has given us strength. And with those words, Arden entered a new chapter. No matter what came next, whether more drones, greater ships, or an enemy beyond their imagination, the settlers knew one thing with certainty. Humanity would not vanish quietly. Their cry of survival had been made, and it would echo across the stars. The settlers of Arden waited as days turned into weeks. The alien vessel still hovered in the sky, a dark shadow that never left. Its lights shifted from time to time, pulsing like watchful eyes, but no new attack came. The silence itself became a test. Every morning the settlers woke expecting fire to fall, yet none came. Instead, the colony lived beneath constant tension, never knowing when the next strike would begin. But something inside the settlers had changed. The fear that once froze their hearts had become strength. They worked together more closely than ever before. Homes were repaired, defenses improved, and food shared without hesitation. The people of Arden no longer thought of themselves as scattered farmers and builders. They were a community bound by survival, a small army of determination. Laren spent long hours studying the drones they had captured. Each broken part told him a little more about the machines that hunted them. He learned how their circuits were powered, how their armor was layered, and where their movements were weakest. He filled notebooks with sketches and plans, sharing them with the settlers so they could build stronger traps and sharper weapons. Myra continued to guide the hearts of the people. She stood each evening in the square, speaking words that reminded them of their worth. "We have already faced death," she told them. "And yet here we stand. Every day we live is proof that they cannot break us." Her voice carried through the crowd, keeping hope alive. Tobin and the farmers worked the fields, though they knew fire might take their crops at any moment. Still, they planted and harvested, believing food itself was an act of resistance. "We feed ourselves," he said, "and that means we deny them victory." His steady hands and unyielding spirit became a symbol to many. Then, one night, the watchers on the cliff saw movement. The alien vessel that had hovered for so long began to rise higher into the sky. Its lights glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed as the ship turned slowly away from Arden. The settlers rushed from their homes, staring upward in disbelief. The vessel was leaving. A wave of relief swept through the valley. Some cheered, some cried, and others simply fell to their knees in silence. After so many days of fear, the sight of the ship withdrawing felt like a miracle. Yet Laren's expression was not one of simple joy. He watched carefully, his brow furrowed. "They are not gone," he said. "They are pulling back to watch. They know now that we will not fall easily. This is not the end. It is only the beginning." Myra stepped beside him, her eyes also on the fading glow of the ship. "Then let this beginning be remembered," she said. "Let them remember that when they tried to break us, we made them turn away." The settlers gathered in the valley once more, this time not to mourn or prepare for battle, but to mark the moment. Fires were lit, and voices rose in songs of earth and Arden. It was not a celebration of final victory, but of survival. They had faced a power far greater than their own and had endured. That same night, their beacon continued to send its signal into the stars. Hours later, a reply came. It was faint, broken by distance, but it carried words that made the settlers' hearts race. "This is Colony Helios. Your message is heard. We too have seen them. We too resist. Stand strong. Humanity rises." The settlers of Arden wept with joy. Their cry of survival had not vanished into empty space, it had been heard. Others were fighting, others were enduring, and together they formed the beginning of something larger than any single world. Humanity was not alone in this struggle. As dawn broke across the valley, the people stood together watching the sun climb over the mountains. Its light touched the fields, the homes, and the scars of battle. It touched faces that no longer carried only fear, but also pride. Laren looked at the horizon and spoke quietly, though his words carried to those nearest him. They thought we would bow. They thought we would break. Instead, we have shown them what it means to be human. We are not the hunted. We are the fear they will come to know. Tobin placed his hands into the soil, feeling its warmth. This land is ours, he said firmly. And so will be the future. Myra turned to the crowd, her voice filled with strength. Remember this day. The day when Arden did not vanish, but rose. The day when humanity's voice grew louder than fear. Let every star carry this truth we endure. The settlers raised their hands high, their voices joining hers. It was more than celebration. It was a promise that reached beyond their valley, beyond their world, into the vastness of the stars. Far above, the alien vessel disappeared into the distance, carrying with it a warning to its kind. Humanity was not weak. Humanity would not surrender. In the quiet of the void, the legend of Arden had begun. The dawn shone brighter than ever before. And with it came the birth of a new truth: humankind was no longer the hunted. From that day forward, they would be the fear.